Hi, I'm posting here because I've been reading this subreddit for a while, and the pattern finally hit me in the face. A lot of people think humiliation after service is subtle, accidental, or unintentional. It's not. It's calculated. It's just done with softer words and familiar faces. I came home after years of service believing that whatever came next would be quieter. I wasn't looking for praise or gratitude. I just wanted a neutral ground. A place where I could breathe without scanning rooms, where silence wasn't a threat, where I didn't have to justify my existence every 5 minutes. I was wrong. For context, I'm a woman. I served for years. Long enough to unlearn softness, long enough to learn restraint, long enough to understand that control doesn't come from raising your voice. It comes from knowing exactly when not to. I came back in civilian clothes, no uniform, no medals on display, no stories. Just a duffel bag, and a version of myself that didn't fit into the role they had saved for me. The people involved are my parents and a few close relatives. Before service, I was already labeled as difficult, too quiet, too independent, too sharp, the kind of girl who doesn't ask twice and doesn't explain herself. When I left, they told people I was lost and needed discipline. When I came back, they acted like I'd failed at whatever fantasy version of me they had invented. At first, it was almost polite, concern wrapped in judgment. You're very different now. You don't smile the way you used to. You should try to be more normal. I let it slide. I told myself they just didn't know how to talk to me anymore. That time would fix it. That distance had made us strangers, and strangers need patience. Then the tone changed. Suddenly, I wasn't a daughter coming home. I was a temporary inconvenience, a body in the house that needed to be managed. New rules appeared overnight. Comments about money, comments about space, comments about how long I was planning to hang around. They spoke to me warmly in front of others and coldly when no one was listening. Jokes started slipping into conversations, always with that laugh afterward, the one that dares you to object. Oh, come on. We're just joking. You've been through worse, haven't you? You're not that sensitive. I noticed how my chair at the table shifted, how conversations stopped when I entered the room, how my past was reduced to vague, dismissive summaries. She was away. She did some military thing. She's back now. No one asked how I was. They asked when I'd leave. The first real sign came when I realized I was being asked to justify basic things. Eating, resting, being quiet, being present. Everything I did was suddenly framed as a burden. And the strangest part? They acted as if I should be grateful for the humiliation, as if being tolerated was a favor. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't raise my voice. I observed. Because that's another thing service teaches you. When someone is trying to break you down, they expect resistance. They don't expect patience. They don't expect stillness. And they definitely don't expect you to remember everything. At that point, I still believed this could be resolved, that this was just tension, misunderstanding, bad communication. I hadn't yet accepted the truth. This wasn't about me changing. It was about them realizing I no longer could be controlled. And that scared them. Looking back, the humiliation didn't start loudly. It crept in. It learned my schedule. It learned when to speak and when to wait. Before service, I was already treated like a disappointment, but it was casual back then. Eye rolls, sighs, comparisons to other people's daughters. It was annoying, but familiar. I knew the rules. Keep your head down. Don't provoke. Don't expect support. I thought I understood the limits of it. Service changed that balance. When I left, something shifted. I wasn't around to absorb their frustration anymore, and I think that unsettled them more than they'll ever admit. I stopped being available. I stopped being convenient. I stopped being present for control. When I came back, they expected the old dynamic to snap back into place. It didn't. At first, the change was subtle. My father started calling me by my name less and less, replacing it with you. My mother stopped asking questions entirely. Conversations happened around me, not with me. When I spoke, responses came late or not at all. Then came the jokes. Careful, she'll snap. Military habits. Don't argue with her. She's trained to intimidate. You must be so tired of pretending to be tough. They laughed. I didn't. I noticed how my movements were suddenly monitored. If I woke up early, it was suspicious. If I slept late, it was lazy. If I was quiet, I was brooding. If I spoke, I was aggressive. There was no correct setting. Everything I did was wrong by design. One afternoon, a relative visited. Someone I hadn't seen in years. They smiled at me, looked me up and down, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "So this is what all those years got you?" Everyone laughed. I didn't react. I smiled politely. Inside, something clicked. That night, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. My parents in the kitchen, voices low, confident. She thinks she's special now. She came back different. Thinks we owe her something. She needs to be reminded where she belongs. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't discomfort. This was intentional correction. After that, the humiliations became more direct. I was given tasks around the house, spoken to like unpaid labor. My opinions were dismissed openly. You've been gone too long. You don't understand how things work here. This isn't the military. You don't get to give orders. Any mention of my service was reframed as a flaw. Too rigid, too cold, too damaged, too much. What hurt the most wasn't the words. It was the way they watched me after saying them, waiting, measuring, hoping for a reaction, hoping I'd finally break character and give them the version of me they could overpower. They didn't know yet that the girl they remembered didn't come back, and I didn't correct them. Not because I was weak, but because I was gathering evidence of who they were and who I had become. The confrontation didn't happen the way movies like to show it. No shouting match, no dramatic exit, no slammed doors. It happened on a random weekday evening, which somehow made it worse. I had just come back from running errands. Nothing special. Grocery bag in one hand, keys in the other. I stepped into the kitchen and immediately felt it. That heavy, staged silence. My parents were there. So was an uncle, all sitting, waiting, like a badly rehearsed intervention. My father didn't even look up at first. He said my name like it was an inconvenience. Sit. I didn't argue. I put the bag down. I sat. That alone seemed to irritate him. He liked resistance. He needed it. Calm made him uneasy. He started talking about money, about space, about how things can't continue like this. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like he was explaining something to a child. You've been gone a long time. You come back and expect everything to be the same. I nodded, still calm. My mother joined in, her tone sharper. You walk around here like you're above us. You don't talk. You look at people like you're judging them. Then my uncle leaned back in his chair and smirked. Military really messed you up, huh? Think you're scary now? That was the first direct insult. The one meant to test me. I looked at him, really looked, and said evenly, "No, I don't think I'm scary." He laughed. Then what do you think you are? I paused, long enough for the room to get uncomfortable. I think I'm quiet, I said. And that seems to bother you. The laughter stopped. My father's face hardened. Watch your tone. This isn't a base. You don't outrank anyone here. There it was. The line he'd been waiting to say. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't change my posture. I didn't justify myself. I'm not trying to outrank anyone, I said. I'm trying to exist without being insulted. That's when it escalated. You should be grateful we let you stay. You came back with nothing. All those years, and this is it. Each sentence landed like a deliberate shove. They weren't angry. They were precise. They wanted me small, ashamed, defensive. I felt the old reflex stir, that instinct to explain, to list everything I'd survived, everything I'd done. But I stopped it, mid-thought. I let silence stretch instead. My uncle scoffed. What? Nothing to say? Lost your voice without a uniform? I smiled. That was a mistake on his part. He thought silence meant weakness. I have plenty to say, I replied. I just don't need to say it to people who already decided who I am. That's when I saw it. The shift. They expected anger, tears, excuses, maybe even an apology. What they got instead was composure. And composure unsettles people who rely on emotional leverage. My father stood up abruptly. If you don't like it here, you can leave. No one's keeping you. I stood too. Slowly. You're right, I said. No one is. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The room felt too small, too tight. Then my mother said the line that stuck with me the most. Don't forget where you came from. I looked at her and answered honestly. I didn't. That's why I survived. I walked out of the kitchen without another word. No drama, no tears. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. Only once I closed the door behind me did I realize something important had changed. They weren't in control of the situation anymore, and they knew it. They just didn't know yet who I really was, or how badly they had underestimated me. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was shaking or crying, but because my body didn't know what to do with the silence. After confrontation, after threat, after humiliation, there's usually noise, more words, more attacks, more damage. Instead, there was nothing. Just a quiet room and my own thoughts circling like they were on patrol. That's the part people don't talk about. The aftermath. When the insults stop, but your nervous system doesn't get the memo. At first, I felt anger. Sharp, clean anger. The kind that makes your jaw tight and your hands steady. The kind I was trained to control. I replayed every sentence in my head, not to fantasize about yelling back, but to analyze intent. Who said what? Why? Where the pressure points were. Old habits don't disappear just because you change clothes. Then came the shock. Not the dramatic kind. No gasping, no tears. Just the quiet realization that I had come home expecting neutrality, and instead walked straight into a power struggle I hadn't agreed to participate in. It felt absurd, almost laughable. I'd faced real threats before, real consequences. And here I was, being measured, diminished, and tested by people who shared my last name. The shock turned into something heavier. Disappointment. Not the cinematic kind where everything collapses at once. The slow kind. The kind that settles in your chest and makes you understand that whatever relationship you thought you were returning to no longer exists. Maybe it never did. Maybe it was just convenient silence on both sides. I started noticing physical reactions I hadn't had in years. My shoulders stayed tense even when I was alone. I listened for footsteps in the hallway. I chose my words carefully in my own head, even when no one could hear them. It was familiar in the worst way, like being back in an environment where one mistake meant consequences. Except this time, there was no clear rulebook. What surprised me most was the guilt. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I didn't feel weak. Part of me expected to break, to feel small again, to doubt myself. Instead, I felt distant, detached, as if my mind had quietly stepped back and said, "This is not your battlefield anymore." That scared me more than anger would have. I realized how much I had changed when I caught myself evaluating the situation the same way I used to evaluate operations, risks, exits, timing. I wasn't thinking about fixing relationships. I was thinking about survival, boundaries, and control of variables. Emotional language no longer fit. Strategic language did. And that came with grief, because no one wants to realize they've outgrown the place they came from. No one wants to accept that home can become hostile terrain. I grieved the version of myself that still believed endurance alone could earn respect. I grieved the fantasy that if I stayed calm long enough, people would stop trying to provoke me. They didn't. The humiliation wasn't just in the words they used. It was in the assumption that I would absorb it quietly, that I would normalize it, that I would carry it like excess weight and thank them for the privilege. By the morning, the anger had cooled. What replaced it wasn't peace, but clarity. I understood something important. Their behavior wasn't about my service, my attitude, or my presence. It was about loss of control. I had left, changed, and returned without needing permission. And that made them feel exposed. That realization didn't make it hurt less, but it made it make sense. And once something makes sense, it stops owning you. I wasn't broken. I wasn't damaged. I wasn't lost. I was simply standing in a place that no longer deserved access to me. And my body already knew it, even if my heart was still catching up. The decision didn't come with a dramatic moment of clarity. No sudden epiphany. No heroic inner monologue. It came quietly, almost clinically, the same way you decide to leave a room that's slowly filling with smoke. You don't debate whether the smoke is personal. You just acknowledge that staying will hurt you. I woke up the next morning and realized something simple and brutal. Nothing I did there would ever be enough. Not calm, not silence, not compliance, not explanations. The goalposts would keep moving because the point wasn't resolution, it was dominance. Once I accepted that, the fog lifted. I stopped trying to read the room, stopped anticipating moods, stopped softening my presence to make others comfortable. I became polite and distant, neutral, efficient. The same way you deal with someone who has already shown you they can't be trusted with access to you. That alone caused a reaction. The moment I stopped engaging emotionally, the pressure increased. Passive-aggressive comments turned sharper. Sudden demands appeared out of nowhere. I was accused of being cold, ungrateful, arrogant. Funny how boundaries always look like arrogance to people who benefited from your silence. Then came the first real attempt at humiliation. A family gathering. Unplanned, of course. I walked into the room and felt it immediately. The tension, the expectation. Someone made a joke about how I must be lost without orders now. Another asked loudly if I'd learned how to live like a normal woman yet. They were smiling, watching. I didn't respond the way they wanted. I didn't snap. I didn't explain. I didn't defend my service. I asked a simple question instead. Why do you think that's appropriate to say to me? The room froze. People are prepared for anger. They're not prepared for calm accountability. The laughter died instantly. Someone mumbled something about jokes. Someone else avoided eye contact. That's when I understood something critical. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I didn't need to prove anything. I needed distance. Within days, I made arrangements. Not dramatic ones, quiet ones. I gathered documents, made calls, looked at options. I didn't announce my plans. I didn't threaten. I didn't argue. I simply prepared an exit that didn't require permission. And here's the part that shocked them. They assumed I was dependent. They assumed I had nowhere to go. They assumed my strength only existed in uniform. They assumed I'd come back diminished. They were wrong. The moment they realized I was leaving, not emotionally, not temporarily, but structurally, the tone changed again. Suddenly, there were attempts at reconciliation, awkward kindness, offers of help that hadn't existed before, fear dressed up as concern. You don't have to rush. Why are you being so extreme? We're family. I listened. And for the first time, I didn't absorb any of it. I told them calmly that I was moving on, that I needed space, that the environment wasn't healthy for me. I didn't accuse, I didn't list offenses, I didn't argue facts. I stated a decision. That's when I saw it. The flicker of panic. Because control doesn't fear anger. Control fears autonomy. They realized too late that their humiliation tactics hadn't broken me. They had clarified me. I left without drama, without tears, without a scene. I didn't slam doors or cut contact overnight. I simply removed myself from a situation designed to make me smaller. And the strangest part? The moment I stepped into my own space, the tension in my body eased. Not instantly, but noticeably. Like setting down a weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Not because I had won, but because I had refused to keep playing. That was my resolution. Choosing myself without asking permission, and walking away before bitterness could replace clarity. Some people call that running. I call it survival with dignity. I didn't post this right away because I needed time to understand what actually happened to me. Not the events themselves, I'm very clear on those, but the effect they had. Humiliation after service doesn't always come as a direct attack. Sometimes it comes disguised as familiarity, as entitlement, as people who think they still get a vote in who you are. Once I left, the noise didn't stop immediately. Messages came in waves, some angry, some guilt-soaked, some pretending nothing ever happened. That was another lesson. People rarely apologize for humiliation. They rewrite it instead. Suddenly, I was too sensitive. Suddenly, it was all a misunderstanding. Suddenly, I was the one creating distance. And for a brief moment, I questioned myself. That's the residue humiliation leaves behind. Not weakness, but doubt. It makes you recheck your own spine. It asks whether standing up for yourself was worth the cost, whether silence would have been easier. But then reality settled. I noticed how my body felt in my own space, how my shoulders dropped, how I stopped listening for footsteps, how I could sit in silence without scanning it for threat. That's when it clicked. No healthy environment makes you feel like a problem for existing. What I learned is this: strength after service looks different. It's not shouting, it's not dominance, it's not proving anything to people who already decided your value for you. Strength is walking away without needing the last word. Strength is not explaining your trauma to people who only want to weaponize it. I also learned that humiliation only works when you accept the frame, when you argue inside someone else's narrative, when you try to convince people who benefit from misunderstanding you. The moment you step out of that frame, the power shifts, and it terrifies them. If anyone reading this is dealing with something similar, especially other women after service, here's what I wish someone had told me. You don't owe softness to people who are testing your limits. You don't owe access to people who confuse familiarity with entitlement. And you don't owe explanations for choosing peace over proximity. Leaving doesn't mean you failed. Staying silent doesn't mean you're strong. And being calm doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do after surviving one battlefield is recognize another one and refuse to fight it. That's what stayed with me. Not bitterness, not anger. Just a quiet certainty that the strongest version of me isn't the one who endures humiliation the longest, but the one who knows exactly when to walk away. If you've made it this far, thanks for reading. And if you're still in that house, that conversation, that dynamic where your dignity is treated like a negotiation, trust yourself. You're not imagining it, and you're not alone. I thought leaving would be the end of it. That distance would cool things down, turn everything into an awkward memory people would quietly avoid. That was naive. Humiliation doesn't always chase you loudly. Sometimes it waits for the moment it thinks you're unprotected. About 2 weeks after I moved out, I had to return to the house to pick up the last of my documents. Birth certificate, old records, things you don't think about until you need them. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn anyone. I just showed up in the afternoon, dressed plainly, keys in hand, mind focused on logistics. That's when everything accelerated. There were people there, not just my parents, but relatives, a cousin, an aunt. Someone I barely recognized. It felt staged, like they'd been waiting for a chance to corner me while still having an audience. The comments started almost immediately. "Oh, look who came back. Did you forget something, or did living alone not work out?" So dramatic. All that moving out nonsense. I didn't respond. I walked past them calmly and went to the room where my things were. I could hear them behind me, voices overlapping, getting louder now that I wasn't reacting. That familiar hunger for a response. Then my father followed me inside. He leaned against the door frame and said, loud enough for everyone else to hear, "You really think you're something special now, don't you? All that time away, and you still came back crawling." I stopped, turned around, looked him in the eyes. "No," I said. "I came back for my documents." That should have been the end of it. But humiliation doesn't stop when it senses restraint. It escalates. He laughed. "Documents? Planning to pretend you're important somewhere? You were always good at pretending." Something in his tone shifted. He wasn't joking anymore. He was trying to provoke, to reclaim ground. Then my uncle said it. The sentence that flipped the room. "You act like people should be afraid of you. But without that uniform, who are you really?" I took a breath. Not to calm down, but to decide. I reached into my bag and took out a folder. Thick, official, stamped. The kind of thing you don't carry unless you expect resistance. I hadn't planned on showing it. I didn't need to. But they pushed. "I'm really curious," my father continued. "Who do you think you are now?" So I answered. I said my full name. Slowly, clearly. Then I said my rank. Then I said my current position. The room went silent. Not awkward silence, not uncomfortable silence. Shock. Someone laughed at first, short and uncertain, then stopped when no one joined in. My aunt's face drained of color. My uncle's mouth stayed slightly open, like his brain couldn't catch up to what he'd just heard. My father took a step back. "That's not funny," he said. "I'm not joking," I replied. Still calm, still quiet. I opened the folder and placed it on the table. Identification, orders, documents, real ones. The kind you don't fake unless you want serious consequences. No one touched them. No one spoke. For the first time since I'd returned from service, I watched the power dynamic collapse in real time. The jokes evaporated. The confidence vanished. The posture changed. Suddenly, they weren't looking down at me anymore. They were recalculating. My uncle finally muttered, "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at him. "You never asked," I said. "You just assumed." That's when fear entered the room. Not fear of me as a person, but fear of what their behavior now meant. Fear of how their words would look if repeated out loud. Fear of consequences they hadn't considered because they'd never imagined I had leverage. My father's voice dropped. "You didn't have to embarrass us." I almost laughed. "You did that yourselves," I said. "I just stopped protecting you from it." No one followed me when I finished packing my documents. No one made another joke. No one raised their voice. As I walked out, I realized something that made my chest feel strangely light. They hadn't been humiliating me because I was weak. They'd been humiliating me because they thought I was safe to humiliate. And the moment that illusion broke, so did their courage. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt confirmed. They finally saw me. And it horrified them. I thought that moment, the documents, the silence, the sudden fear, would be enough. That once the illusion shattered, they'd retreat. People like that usually do. They prefer safe targets. They don't like witnesses. I underestimated one thing: wounded pride. A week later, I got a message from my younger sister. Short, careful, written the way you write when you're afraid someone might read over your shoulder. "They're saying things about you to people." That's how it started. Suddenly, I was a topic. Not directly, of course. Never directly. It was all implication and suggestion. I'd come back aggressive. I was threatening. I was using my past to scare family. Someone even said I was unstable after service and that I'd exaggerated my position to intimidate people. Classic reversal. When humiliation fails, they switch to character assassination. What they didn't expect was speed. Within days, I was contacted by a lawyer, not one I hired, but one who'd been asked questions about me. Hypothetical questions, leading ones. The kind people ask when they're testing how far they can go without consequences. That's when I realized this wasn't just emotional anymore. They were trying to regain control by turning it into something official-looking, something public, something that would force me to react. So I did. I didn't confront them. I didn't argue. I didn't send messages defending myself. I requested records, statements, dates, names. I let professionals do what they do best. And then came the invitation. Not a family meeting, not a conversation, a summons. They'd filed a complaint, not criminal, civil, framed as concern, as protection, as worry about behavior. It was insulting in its creativity. The implication was clear. She's dangerous. She needs to be restrained. That's when anger finally arrived. Not explosive anger, focused anger, the kind that sharpens everything. The hearing was scheduled fast, too fast. They thought urgency would rattle me. They thought I'd panic. They thought the setting alone would put me back in my place. They were wrong. I walked into that building like I'd walked into far worse places before. Calm, neutral, grounded. Civilian clothes again. But posture doesn't come from fabric. They were already there when I arrived. My parents, a couple of relatives, their lawyer, nervous energy everywhere, whispering, glancing at me like I might lunge across the room. I didn't look at them. When we were called in, something unexpected happened. The official presiding paused when he saw my name, looked again, then looked up at me. There was a flicker of recognition. Not familiarity, but context. He stood, not dramatically, not ceremoniously, just instinctively. The room shifted. My father's confidence evaporated in real time. You could see it in his shoulders, in the way his mouth opened slightly like he'd missed a step on the stairs. The questions started. They spoke first. About fear, about concern, about how I'd changed, about how they felt unsafe. They described me like a problem that had suddenly appeared, unprovoked, unpredictable. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't recount every insult. I stated facts, dates, words that had been used, witnesses, messages, patterns. I described restraint, distance, attempts to disengage. I described humiliation without using the word. And then I presented documentation. Not to threaten, not to impress, to clarify reality. The tone in the room changed again. This time, it wasn't fear. It was realization. The slow, sick understanding that they had misjudged the terrain, that what they thought was a private game had crossed into a space with rules and consequences. Questions were redirected, motives examined, inconsistencies exposed. My mother cried. My father stopped speaking entirely. At one point, the official asked a simple question. Why did you think this approach was appropriate? No one answered. That silence felt heavier than all the insults combined, because this time it wasn't just me watching them. Everyone was. When it ended, nothing dramatic happened. No shouting, no accusations. Just a clear dismissal and a warning about misuse of process. As we stood to leave, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, relief. Because humiliation thrives in private. It feeds on isolation, on closed doors, on the idea that no one will ever see what's happening. The moment it's dragged into the light, it loses its teeth. They didn't look at me as I walked past them, not out of respect, but out of shame. And for the first time since I'd come back, I understood something fully. They weren't horrified by my rank. They were horrified by exposure, And that was never about power. It was about truth. I expected fallout. I just didn't expect how fast it would come. Once the complaint was dismissed and the warning was issued, the story didn't stop. It flipped. People who had been confident in private suddenly became very careful in public. Messages I hadn't responded to before were suddenly rewritten, softened, edited. Words like concern and family were replaced with misunderstanding and emotion. The same people who had described me as unstable a week earlier now spoke about me like I was fragile glass. You know how stressed she is after service. She didn't mean it like that. We all said things. No, they said things. I remembered every one of them. What surprised me most wasn't their backpedaling. It was how disoriented they looked once intimidation stopped working. Humiliation had been their language. Without it, they didn't know how to speak to me at all. My father tried first. He called me 2 days later. His voice was unfamiliar, careful, low, rehearsed. "We didn't expect it to go this far," he said. "You embarrassed us." There it was. Not, "We hurt you." Not, "We crossed a line." Just, "You embarrassed us." I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I said something that ended the conversation completely. "You tried to turn concern into control. It didn't work. That's all." Silence. Then anger. Quick. Panicked. "You think you're untouchable now?" "No," I replied. "I think I'm done explaining myself." I hung up. That was the moment the narrative finally broke. Relatives stopped calling. Group chats went quiet. Invitations disappeared. Not because they were angry, but because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing again. Afraid of witnesses. Afraid of documentation. Afraid of accountability. And here's the thing that doesn't get talked about enough. When people lose the ability to humiliate you, they don't suddenly become kind. They become absent. That absence felt strange at first, like the quiet after constant noise. My body kept expecting another hit, another message, another escalation. But it didn't come. Instead, something else happened. People started asking me questions, quiet ones, careful ones, neighbors, distant relatives, even one person who had laughed along before. "Are you okay? Was it really that bad?" I didn't know. I didn't overshare. I didn't dramatize. I told the truth, simply and clearly. And I watched as people's expressions changed, not into sympathy, but into discomfort. Because the truth forces people to reevaluate what they laughed at. That discomfort was never my goal, but it was necessary. One afternoon, my sister came to see me. She looked different, straighter, less cautious. "They stopped," she said. "They don't talk like that anymore." I believed her. Not because they had learned empathy, but because they had learned limits. And that's when I realized something important. Humiliation relies on the assumption that you will protect the people doing it, that you'll stay quiet, that you'll keep things in the family. The moment you stop doing that, the entire structure collapses. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. What I felt was something steadier. Alignment. My actions finally matched who I had become. They never apologized. I didn't expect them to. Apologies require recognition. And recognition would mean admitting that they weren't victims of my distance, but authors of it. The last message I got from my mother was a single line: "I hope you find peace." I read it twice. Then I archived the conversation. Because peace isn't something you find by returning to places that tried to strip you of dignity. Peace is something you build when you stop negotiating your worth. What they lost wasn't access to my life. They lost the ability to rewrite it. And that, I think, was the consequence they never planned for. People assume the end of a situation like this feels dramatic. Like closure arrives with a final conversation, a clear victory, a moment where everything settles neatly into place. That's not how it happened for me. What came after was quieter, and in some ways, harder. Once the noise stopped, I was left alone with myself. No more messages, no more tension, no more constant readiness. The silence that followed wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comfortable either. It forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. I wasn't just recovering from their behavior. I was recalibrating my entire sense of normal. For a long time, my baseline had been pressure, anticipation, reading rooms, measuring words. Even after leaving, my body stayed on alert. I'd wake up early for no reason. I'd flinch at unexpected sounds. I'd draft responses in my head to conversations that weren't happening anymore. That's when it hit me. Humiliation doesn't end when the humiliators stop. It lingers in your reflexes. I had to relearn softness on my own terms. Not the performative kind they always demanded. Smiles, gratitude, silence. But real softness. The kind that comes from safety, from knowing no one is waiting for you to slip up. I started noticing small changes. I cooked without rushing. I let my phone stay unanswered. I stopped explaining my schedule to anyone. I sat with my back to doors again. Things that sound insignificant unless you've lived without them. And with that came something unexpected. Grief. Not for my family the way they were, but for the version of me that kept hoping they might become different. I mourned the energy I'd spent trying to be palatable, trying to translate myself into something they wouldn't attack, trying to shrink without disappearing. That grief needed space, so I gave it space. I didn't chase reconciliation. I didn't try to fix anything. I let distance become permanent without announcing it. Boundaries don't need press releases. They just need consistency. People around me started treating me differently too. Not because of my rank or my past, but because I no longer tolerated casual disrespect. I corrected people calmly. I walked away early. I stopped laughing at jokes that relied on someone else being small. And every time I did, I felt stronger. Not louder, not harder, just clearer. What surprised me most was how little I wanted revenge anymore. Exposure had already done what it needed to do. Not by destroying them, but by ending their access to me. That turned out to be the most effective consequence of all. I learned that humiliation feeds on proximity, on familiarity without accountability, on shared spaces where power is assumed, not questioned. Remove proximity, and the behavior starves. I also learned that strength after service isn't about proving resilience. It's about refusing unnecessary suffering, about recognizing when endurance stops being honorable and starts being self-erasure. If I sound calm now, it's not because it didn't hurt. It did. But pain processed becomes information, and information becomes wisdom. I don't hate them. I don't forgive them either. I don't need to. Neutrality is enough. Distance is enough. Peace doesn't require emotional conclusions. It requires practical ones. I carried forward one rule above all others. Anyone who needs to humiliate you to feel secure should never have access to you. That rule has kept me safer than any weapon ever did. And the irony is this: the people who tried hardest to make me feel small ended up teaching me exactly how big my life could be once I stopped trying to survive inside their version of it. That's not revenge. That's resolution. I waited a long time before writing this last part, mostly because endings are hard when nothing explodes. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic apology, no scene where everyone suddenly understood me. What happened instead was quieter and more honest. Life moved on. Weeks passed, then months. The story stopped being discussed, then stopped being remembered, at least out loud. That's how these things usually end. Not with justice, but with disinterest. People get tired of holding other people's shame. I didn't go back. Not to the house, not to the conversations, not to the version of myself they were still hoping I'd become. At some point, I realized something almost unsettling. They weren't thinking about me anymore the way I thought they were. The humiliation had failed. The exposure had scared them, and once both tools were gone, I stopped being useful to them as a target. That realization hurt in a strange way. Not because I wanted their attention, but because it confirmed something I'd suspected all along. I was never the problem. I was the outlet. Once I accepted that, a lot of old memories rearranged themselves in my head. Childhood moments that suddenly made sense. Conversations that had always left me feeling vaguely wrong without knowing why. The pattern wasn't new. I had just outgrown my role in it. The last, unexpected moment came from someone I didn't anticipate. My father showed up at my door one afternoon. No warning, no message, just him, standing there, older than I remembered, smaller somehow. He didn't come in. He didn't ask to. "I didn't recognize you," he said finally. "Not when you came back." I waited. I didn't fill the silence for him. "I thought if I pushed hard enough," he continued, "you'd come back to how you were." There it was, not an apology, but a confession. "I didn't," I said quietly. "I became who I needed to be to survive." He nodded once, like he'd expected that answer. "I won't bother you anymore," he said. And then he left. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, feeling something I didn't expect. Closure. Not because he showed up, but because I no longer needed him to. That was the final shift. The moment I realized the story had truly ended, not because everyone learned a lesson, but because I stopped needing one. So here's what I'll say, especially to anyone reading this who came back from service and found themselves treated like an inconvenience, a threat, or a disappointment. Humiliation after service is rarely about what you did. It's about what you survived. Some people can't handle that you've seen the world without their permission, that you've learned discipline, restraint, and self-trust somewhere they couldn't reach you. Instead of rising to meet you, they try to pull you back down to where they feel safe. You don't owe them that. You don't owe explanations. You don't owe softness. You don't owe silence. And you definitely don't owe loyalty to people who only value you when you're easy to control. Strength isn't staying. Strength isn't enduring. Strength isn't proving anything to people committed to misunderstanding you. Strength is knowing when something is no longer yours to carry and putting it down. I didn't come out of this kinder. I didn't come out softer. I came out clearer. And that clarity gave me something no humiliation ever could take away. Ownership of my life, my story, and my future. If you're still in that place, where your past service is used against you, where your calm is mistaken for weakness, where your silence is taken as permission, please hear this. You're not broken. You're not dramatic. And you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do after surviving everything else is refuse to be humiliated ever again. That's not bitterness. That's self-respect. And it's enough.